Uh, the they asked me to do it, and I was anxious to do some live appearances.
No one alive today was supposed to read these letters. Not the fans, not the historians, and definitely not the public. They were meant to stay hidden, locked away, sealed in silence, buried by someone who clearly believed the truth inside them was too dangerous or too painful to ever see daylight. But then something went wrong. A private estate sale in Tennessee, routine, quiet, unnoticed, suddenly became the center of a discovery that is already rewriting parts of Elvis Presley's life story. Because tucked inside an old trunk, beneath faded photographs and forgotten memorabilia, was a small wooden box, unlabeled, dust-covered, locked shut. A box that once belonged to someone inside Elvis's inner circle. And when it was opened, everything changed. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all handwritten, all in Elvis Presley's unmistakable script. Some neatly folded, others crumpled like they'd been written in frustration. Some sealed, some unfinished, some dated, some not. But all of them revealing a side of Elvis that almost no one ever truly saw. These weren't fan replies. These weren't business notes. These weren't love letters for publicity. These were private confessions, letters that Elvis wrote but never sent. And the first question everyone is now asking is simple: why? Why did Elvis, a man who could have communicated with anyone he wanted, a man who moved crowds, shook nations, and changed culture itself, choose to write these raw, vulnerable letters only to hide them away? The earliest letter in the box is dated 1958. That alone is historic. This was the year Elvis was preparing to leave for military service in Germany, a moment already heavy with emotional weight. But the opening line of this letter wasn't about fear of war or fame or loneliness. It was something far more personal and far more alarming. He wrote, "I don't know who to trust anymore." 7 words that immediately shift the ground beneath everything we thought we knew about Elvis in that era. People assumed he was surrounded by loyal friends, dependable family, and a support system built to protect him as his fame exploded. But this letter paints a very different picture, one of suspicion, emotional isolation, and betrayal sitting just beneath the surface. And Elvis didn't stop there. In that same letter, he mentions someone close to him, someone whose name he never wrote out, referring instead to them only as him. Elvis said he felt watched, managed, and shaped in ways that made him feel trapped between who he was and who the world wanted him to be. This was the first sign that these letters weren't simply emotional outlets. They were warnings, messages to himself, reminders of the internal battles he could never speak aloud. But the next layer of mystery came from how these letters ended up in the box. Every clue points toward someone who had access to Elvis at an intimate level. Someone who traveled with him, worked with him, or lived near him. Someone close enough to keep these letters, and close enough to hide them intentionally. The trunk they were found in belonged to a man who passed away decades ago, one of Elvis's lesser-known associates, someone who rarely spoke publicly but was always seen around him. No one knows if he was protecting Elvis or protecting himself. But the biggest shock came from a different letter entirely. This one had no date, no greeting, no signature, just a single haunting sentence at the top: "This can't leave this room." And what followed in that letter suggests it was written only days before one of the most pivotal moments of Elvis's personal life, something that shaped his relationships, his decisions, and ultimately his emotional stability. The handwriting is frantic, The tone is urgent. The content hints at a confrontation Elvis feared would change everything, though he never explained why. And the recipient? Unknown. The letter stops abruptly, almost as if he was interrupted. This is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. These letters aren't artifacts. They're confessions. They're emotional fingerprints left behind by a man who carried more weight than the world ever realized. And this box, this silent, forgotten box, holds the most unfiltered version of Elvis Presley we have ever seen. But one question hangs heavier than all the others. Why were these letters hidden for 50 years? And who was trying to keep this version of Elvis from ever being discovered? That question leads directly into the next revelation, because the content of these letters doesn't just expose Elvis's fears. They expose the people around him, and the secrets he believed they would destroy everything to protect. The deeper you go into these letters, the more it becomes clear that Elvis never expected, never wanted anyone to read what he was writing. Because these pages don't sound like a superstar documenting his glory. They sound like a man confessing to the only place he felt safe, a blank sheet of paper. And the emotional weight inside them is almost overwhelming. One of the most revealing letters is written during Elvis's early years of fame, when the world saw him as unstoppable, untouchable, untamed. But the tone on the page is nothing like the electrifying figure the public adored. It's quiet, exhausted, almost pleading. Elvis admits that he feels surrounded by people but alone all the same. He writes about walking into crowded rooms and sensing that everyone expected something from him. Another smile, another laugh, another spark of magic he had to produce on command. He talks about expectations pressing down on him like a second skin he couldn't peel off. And then he writes something even more personal. I don't know who I am when the music stops. It's raw, it's unsettling, and it hints at the emotional fracture forming long before the world ever saw it. But the letters don't stop at loneliness. Some carve into parts of his life people thought they understood, especially his relationships. A letter written during his time in Germany reveals tension most fans never knew existed. Elvis never names Priscilla directly, but he writes about someone he cares for deeply, someone he fears won't understand what this life does to a man. He describes confusion, guilt, and a fear that he was too broken to love anyone the way they deserved. There's a moment in the letter where Elvis seems to wrestle with himself, torn between wanting to be honest and fearing the consequences of that honesty. He writes, "What if the real me isn't enough for anyone?" Those aren't the words of a global icon. Those are the words of a young man drowning in expectations no human being could carry forever. Another letter, written years later, adds a darker layer. Here, Elvis hints at conflict with someone in his close circle, someone he once trusted without question. He doesn't use names, but the tone is unmistakable. Elvis writes about feeling manipulated, pushed into decisions he didn't fully agree with, and cornered into an image he no longer recognized. He says, "They love what I do, not who I am." The frustration bleeds through every line. You can feel him grappling with a truth he didn't want to admit, that the people closest to him might have been shaping his world more than supporting it. And then comes the most chilling detail in this section. One letter contains a warning. Elvis writes, "If this ever comes out, they will destroy everything. No explanation, no context, no clarification about who they are or what this refers to. just fear, pure sharp fear, etched into ink. This sentence alone rattled historians who reviewed the letters. Because Elvis wasn't a paranoid man by nature, he trusted easily, sometimes too easily. For him to feel threatened enough to write those words, something had to be happening behind the scenes that he didn't dare speak aloud. And that's exactly what makes these letters so haunting. Elvis wasn't writing for fame or sympathy or legacy. He was writing to unload burdens he couldn't express to anyone else. These confessions were the only place he could admit he was overwhelmed, insecure, conflicted, or afraid. He mentions contracts, pressures, family tensions, and a situation that made him feel owned, not supported. He even admits he'd been keeping secrets from people he cared about because he felt revealing them would tear the whole house down. Then he writes a line that historians are still debating today. They don't want the truth out. They need me quiet. Not him, not she. They. That single word widens the circle. Suddenly, this isn't about one person betraying Elvis. It suggests a group, a system, a collective force shaping his life in ways he'd never publicly acknowledge. And then comes the most devastating emotional blow. Elvis admits that he feels trapped between who he is and who he's allowed to be. He writes, "I'm tired of playing a version of myself that isn't real." In that moment, the world-famous superstar disappears, and what's left is a young man who feels stripped of his identity, a man who wants something he's never truly had: control. The letter continues with a description of a recent incident, something that clearly pushed him past his breaking point. He talks about an argument, a confrontation, a moment where he finally realized he couldn't keep going down the same path. His words become sharper, more urgent, more desperate. And then, everything stops. The final sentence reads, "If this goes where I think it's going, then nothing more." The ink ends abruptly. No closing, no signature, no explanation. It's not just unfinished, it feels interrupted. Did someone walk into the room? Did Elvis lose his nerve? Did something happen that made him abandon the letter entirely? No one knows. But that single broken sentence has become the centerpiece of the entire discovery, because it suggests Elvis was on the edge of revealing something major, something he believed had serious consequences. And the timing of this letter, the urgency of his tone, the fear behind his words, all point toward a moment that changed his life trajectory. This wasn't just a confession. This was Elvis Presley trying to tell the truth before it was too late. And the most haunting part? We still don't know what he was about to say. But the final section reveals the one thing we do know. Someone made sure these letters never saw the light of day, until now. Once historians finished reading the letters, one question rose above all the emotion, all the heartbreak, and all the unfinished thoughts. Who hid these, and why? Because nothing about this discovery feels accidental. These weren't tossed into a drawer or misplaced in a move. They were deliberately tucked away inside a private trunk, sealed inside a box, and kept hidden for half a century. Long after Elvis was gone, long after anyone could defend themselves, and long after the truth could change the lives of the people involved. The man who owned the trunk wasn't a celebrity, a family member, or a household name. He was someone who floated just beneath the surface of Elvis's daily life, close enough to hear things, see things, and be trusted with things most people never had access to. His job placed him around Elvis constantly, but his name rarely appeared in public. This was someone with proximity, but also someone with motive, because inside these letters is a version of Elvis few people ever acknowledged. A man struggling, doubting, fearing, and fighting for control over a life that no longer fully belonged to him. A man who was starting to see the cracks in the empire built around him. A man who was preparing, maybe, to confront someone or something that had been shaping his path from the shadows. And that kind of truth, it could shake reputations, threaten legacies, expose people who spent decades hiding behind Elvis's fame. There's a theory among those who examine the letters. The man who kept them wasn't protecting Elvis. He was protecting himself, or protecting the people who were connected to the events Elvis wrote about. If these letters had surfaced earlier, during lawsuits, disputes, family tension, or business conflicts, they could have changed everything. But there's another possibility, one that feels even more human. Maybe he kept them because he knew Elvis wasn't just a superstar. He was a fragile, complicated person who didn't deserve to have his private pain turned into headlines. Maybe holding onto these letters wasn't about secrecy, but loyalty. A final attempt to shield Elvis long after he was gone, because no one else would. The truth likely sits somewhere between both extremes. A blend of fear and protection, guilt and devotion, self-interest and love. But the final letter in the box, the one written in fragments and ending mid-sentence, adds another layer entirely. Because attached to it, tucked into the same envelope, was something that changes how we look at the entire discovery. A small handwritten note from the man who hid them. No date, no signature, just 6 words that feel like a confession in themselves. He wasn't ready for the world. Was he talking about Elvis? The truth inside the letters? Or the fallout that would follow if the public ever saw what Elvis wrote in his darkest moments? It doesn't matter, because now the world has seen them. And these letters don't tarnish Elvis's image. They humanize him. They strip away the myth and show the man beneath, the one who loved deeply, hurt quietly, feared privately, and trusted too easily. For decades, fans have argued over who influenced Elvis's decisions, who controlled his career, who shaped the narrative of his life. These letters don't provide every answer, but they prove one thing without question. Elvis Presley wasn't just a victim of fame. He was a victim of the people who tried to manage it. Some were trying to help him. Some were trying to use him. Some were trying to save him. And some were trying to silence him. But through these newly discovered letters, Elvis speaks again. Not through interviews, not through gossip, not through the stories others tell about him, but through his own handwriting, his own thoughts, his own fear and fire. He didn't write these words for the public. He wrote them for himself, and maybe for the one person he hoped would listen someday. Now that day has finally come. These letters don't just fill gaps in Elvis's story. They fill the silence he carried for years. They reveal the battle he was fighting inside, while the world only saw the shine on the outside. And the final, unfinished sentence, the one that cuts off just before he reveals what he feared most, reminds us that Elvis didn't get to finish his story on his own terms. But this discovery brings us closer than we've ever been. These letters weren't meant to be found, weren't meant to be opened, weren't meant to be read. But now they are. And the truth Elvis never mailed is finally, after 50 long years, delivered. If you want more untold Elvis stories, unheard confessions, and hidden moments the world was never supposed to see? Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. This is just the beginning. More letters, more secrets, and more lost truths are waiting to be uncovered. Stay tuned.